Synoptic Gospels presented by Michelle Paulauskas. The Synoptic Gospels were the first three books in the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Today we're going to take a look at the reliability of the Gospels. In thinking about the Synoptic Gospels and their accounts of the life of Jesus, many ask, are they reliable? Where did the writers get their information from? How can we know when they were written? If you've ever taken time to read the Gospels, we know that they do not share every story, nor share it the exact same way, or even highlight Jesus' teachings and works with the same perspective. Dr. Craig Kinner quotes, "Calling them reliable does not suggest that the Gospels prove identical in all details, or share identical perspectives. Still, less than after 20 centuries, we can unearth evidence to support their every point." Let's talk about the sources the writers of the Gospels used. Most scholars today recognize the Gospels as ancient biographies. In the tradition of ancient writing, more importantly in the writing of biographies, authors source their material from eyewitnesses. In the time period in which the Gospels are written, they drew on the living memory from eyewitnesses. Historians define living memory as 60 to 80 years. In ancient times, writers stayed close to their sources and even respected their source. The objective was not to invent new material. They stood out from novels of this time period because they were meant to be a historical account of the life and teachings of Jesus. It can be noted that many novels during this era were romance for pastime, whereas in the biography genre, writers were given freedom to rearrange words, but still, due to the number of stories being told from eyewitnesses by the time the writers wrote their Gospels, they would have been called out for deviating from the truth or their sources. Because of the first century date for the Gospels, we are dealing with oral history. Oral history preserves culture when writing is not dominant or, like in biblical times, harder to come by. Craig Kinner has done ample study on the Gospels as historical sources. In an interview, he was asked if we're reasonable to believe that the words of Jesus and actions were preserved well before they were in writing. He responded by saying, once again, while ancient biography authors had freedom to not write verbatim, but noted how the Gospels stayed closer to their sources than was common in ancient biographies. Interestingly, though, aphorisms or proverb-like sayings remained word for word, like haste makes waste, but with added narratives or episodes being summarized. An important characteristic of living memory in this era is the oral tradition of society. Rabbis would teach and students would memorize their teachings. Students would memorize sermons that were hours long. So we have several aspects that affect living memory. One being the social, and then the other being the psychological memory, which is how long can someone remember something? When your memory side of your brain isn't used, you lose it. Think back before cell phones that record and store our contacts. You either memorized the number or wrote it down in a phone book. Culturally, memorization was a very prominent part of the early elementary education. In teaching children, even those who followed a rabbi were expected to memorize sayings and sermons from their teachers. So, how can we rely on living memory and oral history as a reliable source? Psychology states that the nature of human memory retains key events or significant events at only 50% after 5 years. With this in mind, I think the words from Luke 1 through 4 summarize well the work the authors of the Synoptic Gospels set out to do. He begins by stating that there were many written sources, that they used oral sources, aka eyewitnesses. He completed his own investigations, meaning he interviewed his sources, and he couldn't fudge since the material was already widely known in the early church. In conclusion, can we rely on the Synoptic Gospels as reliable sources? My conclusion, based off the historical evidence of ancient biographies and their characteristics, such as the use of eyewitnesses and the understanding of oral history, proves yes. As you take time to read through the Synoptic Gospels, you're able to make observations of the similarities as well as the differences of the writer's perspective with this new understanding in mind.